Hi everyone, I'm Naïma. Welcome back to my channel. You'll never guess what week it is. It's my 2-year anniversary since getting long COVID. It's not really an anniversary that I thought I'd be celebrating, but here we are. This video is an attempt at a timeline of the last 24 months. I'll be going through everything from my initial infection 2 years ago to my worsening symptoms until now, where I'm definitely approaching recovery. I went from having a mild case of COVID-19 in the first wave and seeming to recover until a few months later when I was completely bedbound. Now I'm starting to see huge improvements and I'm starting to have a much more normal life. This video is a bit of an update on where I was and where I am now. So keep watching and don't forget to like and subscribe if you're new here. It helps others with long COVID to find these videos. Let's start with my initial infection and recovery. During my initial infection, I had what we were calling mild symptoms: headache, body soreness, muscle aches, a bit of a cough, fever, sore throat, and general fatigue. I took about 2 days off work, and after 5 or 6 days I thought I was better, so I carried on as normal. Within 2 weeks I went for a 5-kilometer run, and this would have been completely normal for me before my infection. I struggled to run the full 5k and I started to feel a resistance in my chest, almost as if I was like running through quicksand and there was something pushing me back. So I felt this real chest tightness and breathlessness to an extent that wasn't normal for a 5k for me anyway. So this would be the first of a weird set of residual symptoms that would start to creep in. I had a rash all over my back that looked like my skin was discoloring. I had mild chest pains after exertion, and my skin was really sensitive to heat as well. And I tried lots of different creams and things to try and get this rash to go away, and it wasn't subsiding. I heard a really interesting analogy that really springs to mind during this period, that getting a chronic condition is a bit like hearing a car alarm in the distance that's getting closer and closer and closer and louder and louder and louder, and everyone has a different threshold for when they start to listen. And for me, my threshold was when I became completely bedbound. The second part of my long COVID infection I would call denial. So by October, these residual symptoms started to get a lot more severe, and the chest pains that had been just a few minutes every few days became constant. It was a severe pain running all the way down my sternum that seemed to reverberate, almost vibrate across my body towards my back and radiate through my arms. They got so severe that I could no longer walk. I remember trying to walk for 5 minutes and having to turn back, and the pain started out more mild, and over a few days it built and built and built until I was completely bedbound. I had a few other symptoms as well, including fatigue. I was completely wiped out, shortness of breath, headaches, and many more that I'm probably forgetting at this point. Every time I'd exert myself, so this would be going up the stairs or picking up a bag or doing any movement within the house, because I was completely housebound at this point, I would feel my chest getting more and more sore and my heart racing within my chest. It was almost felt as if I could hear it. It was really, really disorienting. It was like waking up from one day to the next in a completely different body that didn't feel right. During this time, it felt as if my symptoms were cyclical in nature. I would have a few days at a time where I was completely incapacitated, unable to do anything apart from lie in bed in the dark, to periods where I felt almost normal, or I could forget that I was ill at all. But that sense of dread never went away. That sense that at any point I could be back to being bedbound in the dark and scared, it never went away. It's always in the back of your mind. You're thinking, when's it gonna happen again? Is it gonna happen again? And you're living with that fear, even on the good days. On the good days, I could kid myself that I was normal, and on the bad days, I thought I was never gonna feel normal again. I felt like I forgot what normal felt like on those days. I call this period denial because I was still I still believe that one day I'd wake up and put it all behind me, almost like in a film where you see someone waking up from a bad dream. I wanted that to happen for me to wake up one day and be like, right, that's done, that's over. The next part of this illness I would call diagnosis and despair. Those 6 months were the worst months of my life. By this point, I'd realised that I was in this illness for the long haul. I didn't yet know what it was, but during the bad days, I couldn't breathe. I was so scared of the symptoms that I went to A&E several times. Each time I went through the same routine. I would do a chest x-ray, I would get my blood pressure checked, I would do an ECG and countless other tests, and every time the same thing. Everything was normal, everything was fine, I was healthy. And I knew that nothing was normal about what I was going through at that point. I was diagnosed with something called costochondritis, which is inflammation of the chest wall. And it didn't seem quite right because I was experiencing a wide variety of symptoms at this point. It had got a lot worse than the first few months. I was getting nosebleeds, I was getting really painful sore throat where I could taste blood in my mouth. I was completely bedbound at this point. All I could do during the day was sit up to eat, and then I would be back in bed. Everything I was doing was from bed, and I couldn't speak, I couldn't do anything for those early months in 2021. I felt like I was just existing, I wasn't living. And there was very little information about long COVID at this time, and it was only the third time that I went to A&E that I stumbled across a doctor who looked through my test, looked and saw that I'd been multiple times, and he alerted me that it could be long COVID. And I burst into tears because a big part of the challenge when you're facing a chronic condition is the lack of answers, the lack of control, and the fact that you're in this no man's land where you don't know why you're so ill or what you're experiencing, if you're the only one who's ever felt this pain. It was the first time that someone had acknowledged that what I was going through was real, and the pain I felt was real even if no one could see it. And the really challenging part about this period is that I could see no meaningful improvement during this time. It's very difficult to give yourself any sense of hope that things could get better. During this period, I started to gain a lot more control over my illness. I moved from resisting my condition and fighting it to learning to manage the symptoms, and that was a really big transitional moment for me because I stopped fighting what was happening and I started to realize that I needed to make some drastic changes. I started to also see some really small improvements. The number of days that I was bedbound was slowly getting less and less. Before, the bad days had outweighed the good, and it seemed to tip over from June 2021 onwards, where I had more good days than bad. I still had periods where I was bedbound a lot of the time, but I could start to pick out what had caused those relapses, and I could get myself into a position where I could recover. I was also accepted onto the long COVID clinic during this time, where I did a few tests, and finally some tests gave me a few answers about what was going on, particularly a 6-minute walk test where my blood pressure and heart rate doubled after a 6-minute walk, and it became clear that I had dysautonomia or POTS-like symptoms, and that was what was causing my chest pains and respiratory issues. I learned that the initial ups and downs had been worsened by my overexertion, and that it wasn't just physical exertion that was contributing to the relapses. It was mental, psychological, physical, and emotional activity. All of these things that were contributing. I learned that planning my days, pacing, removing stressors, and creating a routine and a plan could really help me to get better. I started meditating, I started therapy, I moved somewhere quieter, and I started to develop a routine that worked for me in this new body. The last 6 months have been a complete transformation. I'm learning to accept my illness and also be more patient with my recovery. I can't ignore the improvements that I'm seeing, but I'm trying really hard not to skip ahead, to plan when I'm already better. So I'm now 6 months into taking beta blockers, which have made a huge improvement. I've been taking an array of vitamins and minerals, and I really think time is what has helped the most in getting better, and pacing and being being able to restructure my life so that I have less relapses. I think now the ups and downs that I was having in the early months of 2021 were because I was fighting it, whereas now I still have the ups and downs, but these cycles aren't as intense, they're not as extreme as they were, and so I don't get as much despair at my recovery and the pace of it. I can now walk about 5 to 10 minutes per day. I can do gentle exercise for 5 minutes a day. I can work 6 hours. I can sit up like this with no chest pain, and my symptoms are stable as long as I stick to my routine. So I'm really hoping that the next 6 months will see me doing even more, and will see me start to have a much more normal life where I don't need to constantly be thinking, am I deteriorating? Am I getting better? It takes up a lot of mental energy, and I'm really hopeful for the next few months. I want to thank everyone who's been watching these videos, who's been reaching out to me, sharing their stories and speaking with me. It really means a lot. I started this channel because I'd spent an entire year living in fear, feeling isolated, and like no one understood what I was going through, this internal physical struggle that long COVID is. And it's meant a lot to me that these videos are resonating with people and that there are others going through similar things. So thank you so much for watching and for supporting this channel. I'll see you in my next video.